shift stands for shaping health in future times, and it's kind of addressing the links between design and healthcare and how these things are becoming more and more interrelated as we move into the future.
Bringing both academics, creatives, designers, practitioners all into the same space to kind of have a shared dialogue about what we can do, what we can create.
We've got a huge, diverse range of work. There's things looking at material use in the NHS, things looking at communities, things looking at speculative and futuristic design.
We really wanted to create a really fun and dynamic sort of show and tell style for the symposiums, and have these tactile objects that really bring these ideas to life. Actually getting to hold them and touch them and interact with them, we thought was a really playful and engaging aspect to bring to the symposium.
So I graduated in 2007, I worked as a graphic designer for a number of years. I got really interested in Victor Papanek and his social design of the late 1970s. And I didn't study product design, but like that idea of social responsibility in design was something that I was quite interested in. It was around 2014, and there was a lot of talk in Silicon Valley about the quantified self, which is now so banal and boring and everyday, but right back then it was very interesting, this idea of like, what if we could gather data about our heartbeats and our steps and our, all these different kind of health metrics. Like, what does that mean? How, if we can quantify ourselves, like, how can that transform healthcare? And I was really interested in that on a conceptual level around death and dying. But then I moved swiftly into working at Imperial College and working inside a hospital, really tackling complex healthcare challenges, which were really supporting the NHS to redesign services and processes. So one of the big ones we did around 2017 was called the RESPECT process, which is basically a redesign of the do not attempt resuscitation process that we use in emergency care settings. So that was like a really hard design problem with a really manifestly impactful solution. If you're working at a conceptual edge, which is like, oh, here's a new technology, or here's a new reframing of health, like, let's play with that, let's play at the edge of that. When you're dealing with any kind of system, like a healthcare system or a housing system or a civil service system, like, there's a huge amount of inertia and resistance to change, which makes things kind of slow. But then I think in that, it's, you learn to kind of have a different kind of, it's like having a different sense of time. Like, what does making an impact mean? It's not about shipping something or finishing something in 2 weeks. It's about the idea you might have to work on it for a year. And then if you got the stomach for it, knowing that you can work on something for 5 years is like, it's quite exciting, but also quite hard. With like working in palliative care and end-of-life care, you basically got a problem that you can't fix. And so the kind of philosophy and the practice and the methodology is very different, because you're basically saying we can't fix this, but let's be in that space anyway. Let's exist and kind of do things in that space. And I think that's really instructive to thinking about how to do things differently. And so to kind of like ladder that back up to the rest of like the domain of healthcare, I think is really interesting. Working in palliative care, when we talk about like hope, Joan Halifax, who's a Zen kind of master, I guess, started doing a lot of end-of-life care work in the 70s, and she talks about wise hope, and it's a kind of Buddhist notion as well, this idea that you can never truly know the outcome of some things, and wise hope is kind of being with that kind of uncertainty, that radical uncertainty, and kind of moving through it. If you're optimistic, you would plant seeds in the winter and kind of just be optimistic that you'll have something to have in the summer. Whereas wise hope is to say, planting seeds, and I don't know if I'll ever see them being, if I'll ever reap them or see them have the fruit from them, but someone will. And it's kind of like, it's a shift to kind of move yourself out that center. It's less egotistical, it's less sort of, it spreads the hope and awareness to other people and makes it bigger than yourself, which I think is a really important thing.
Some of the theoretical and practical approaches are really interesting, stuff that you might not necessarily be aware of, like people looking at different sensory experiences, people looking at speculative material use, speculative ways of making.
It really helps us to think in new ways. I love coming to conferences and hearing about, we're hearing work that's been happening in India, hearing about work that's happening in New Zealand, and then kind of considering how we can bring things like that into our own practice, whether it's about materiality or if it's about technology. This might be the first symposium, there could be another one in Design Hopes too, and continue the conversations moving forward.